So this Maamar was said on Shabbos Parsha Shmois Chav Gimel Teves, Shabbos Mavarchim of Shvat and Tafshin Yud Gimel, like the year that the Alter Rebbe passed away, where he passed away on Matzei Shabbos Parsha Shmois, and that was Chav Dalet Teves. It's interesting that it actually relates, as we'll see soon, to the Perek of in Basi Lagani, Perek Yudalit, that we learned this year, that talks about the mashal of light and what happens to light when it comes through a colored vessel. As we'll see, this Maamar talks about that topic as well. So it says like this: Hayisheves beganim geimer barach deidi geimer al hari besamim. A pasuk in Shir Hashirim that Hayisheves beganim, sitting in the gardens. The continuation of the pasuk is Chavere makshivim lekeilecha. The friends listen to your voice. So barach deidi, my beloved, ran away al hari besamim, upon the mountains of besamim. So the Rebbe Rashab explains in his Maamar, this Dibur Maschil, Sha'amrei b'chav dalet tevis, Yemi Lula dad merazak, and that he said on chav dalet tevis, the Yemi Lula of the Alter Rebbe, Hayisheves beganim medaber ba'gilui de Gan Eden. What does it mean, Hayisheves beganim, sitting in the gardens? That's talking about the revelations in Gan Eden. Ganim Loshin Rabbi. So why is it gardens? Because Gan Eden, there's two levels of Gan Eden. In Gan Eden Atacht and Gan Eden Elyon. There's lower Gan Eden and higher Gan Eden. Shehem Bebia, and both of these exist within Bria Yetzir Asiya. Gan Eden Atacht and Basiya. The lower Gan Eden is in Asiya. The Gan Eden Elyon Bebria, and higher Gan Eden is in the world of Bria. Hayisheves beganim. So who sits in the gardens? Right? Meaning, what is sits in the gardens means a level that's manifested within the gardens, within Gan Eden Atacht and Gan Eden Elyon, in Bria Yetzira Asiya. So Hayisheves beganim eine Malchus Tatzilos shemetzamsemes atzma leishev be'aganim. So Hayisheves beganim, the one sitting in the gardens, is a reference to Malchus of Atzilus that limits itself, restricts itself to be able to be expressed in the Ganim, in the lower levels in Bia. The Rebbe Rashab goes on and says that Barach Deidi, when my beloved runs away to the mountains of Besamim, that's talking about what will happen, the revelations that will happen la'asad lavi when Mashiach comes. Which is much, much higher, incomparably higher than the revelations that are there in Gan Eden now. Why? So the Rebbe Nishmas Eden says that Gili de Gan Eden or Ramamali, Vagili de Lasid Lava Yoera Seviv. Because the revelation that exists now in Gan Eden, that's Ramamali, that's the light of the Eibush there, that's within the world that fills the worlds. In other words, that's tailored according to each level, according to the recipient, each level that is able to receive it. Whereas the Gili de Lasid Lava will be Era Seviv, the transcendent or encompassing light. In other words, the level of that surrounds the world because it's not contained within it. So it's b'chulu almin b'shava, as Basel Gani talks about the that's in all worlds equally, because it's not affected at all by the nature of the recipients, by the abilities of the recipients. This is the end of the pasuk, that Barach Daidi, that he runs away to the Hari Besamim. Why is it runs away? Right, just like it explains in Tanya about when the people go away from by the Yitzias Mitzrayim, that they're not ready. It's not a step in a structured step, and it's a step that leads from one to the next, but rather it's bederech bricha v'diluk. It has to run away. It's a jump. It's completely outside of the structure and order, right? Because it's outside of the context completely of the lower level, right? Going up from Gan Eden to the revelation that'll be lost in Lavai is a complete leap beyond the Seder V'Adraga, beyond the structured, orderly fashion. Nonetheless, even though the Gilui of Lasid Lavi, the revelation that will be when Mashiach comes, is completely and totally higher than the revelation that came nowadays in Gan Eden, but nonetheless, it still has to come first. The order of the pasuk is first Hayisheves Beganim, and only then Barach Deidi. In other words, first, in order to be able to reach that Eiraseviv, even though the Eiraseviv isn't comparable at all to the Hamamale, to the Gili in Gan Eden, and therefore can't come as a structured, as a logical next step. Nonetheless, in order to get to the Eiraseviv of Lasalave, first you have to have the revelation of Eramamale that there is in Gan Eden, and only after you have it, even though that doesn't seem to prepare you for the next step at all, because it's not a next step, it's a total jump. But you have to have first the revelation of Eramamale in Gan Eden before you could receive the Gili of Eiraseviv in Lasalave. Hayisheves Beganim, and that's the order of the pasuk. That first you have Hayisheves Beganim, you have the revelation of Gan Eden Elyon and Gan Eden Atachten, of Eramamale. And only after that, Baruch Deidi al Hari Besamim, are you able to run away to the mountains of Besamim? First, you have to have the Gilui of Yesheves Beganim of Eramale, and only after having that Gilui in its fullness are you able to reach. Even though it's not a next step, you still need to run away, you still need to jump, but only after you have the first one, the Gilui of Eramale, are you able to reach the Gili of Hare Besamim of Eiraseviv. Okay, so what did we say basically? That Hayisheves Beganim, Baruch Deidi al Hare Besamim, Hayisheves Beganim is the Giluyim of Gan Eden, which is the Gilui of Eramamale. Baruch Deidi al Hare Besamim is the Gilui of Lasid Lavei, which is a Gilui of Eiraseviv. To get from the Gili of Eramamale to Eiraseviv requires a quantum leap, requires a complete bricha v'dilug, running away and jumping a leap. But nonetheless, only after having the Gili of Eramamale could you then reach the Gili of Eiraseviv. What does that all mean, right? That's what the Rebbe Rashab says in the Maamar, the statement of facts, as it were. But what does it mean? What is the difference between these different Giluyim? And why is one a quantum leap from the other? So to explain this, what is the difference between Eramamale and Eiraseviv? Eiraseviv hu pashut ve'Eramamale ba b'eschalkos. Chachma chesed chul. Says the difference between them is that Mamale comes, Eiraseviv is pashut. Right? Again, it's v'chulu almin b'shava. Haseviv is a light that's beyond being defined at all by the recipient, and because it's not being defined by the recipient, so the light itself is a simple light because it's the same everywhere, and it doesn't change. So it's one light, it's simple light, there's no definition. Whereas Eramamale, since it's coming down to each level according to what it's able to handle, the contained within Chachma, the contained within Chesed, and so on. So therefore, the Hamamale comes in a manner of Ischalkos, of separation. And he goes on to explain in the Maamar the fact itself that Eramamale is divided based on what is receiving, based on the keli, based on the recipients. Now, practically speaking, you don't actually see that there's different levels in Eramamale. Theoretically, all you're seeing is that this comes into different kelim, and each keli will divide it according to the nature of the keli. So seemingly, the division that Eramamale has isn't in the itself, but rather just in the fact that it's enclosed within different kelim. And the fact that it's enclosed in the keli means that it's therefore becoming be'eschalkos, it's therefore being divided. However, it says the Rebbe Rashab says in the Maamar, the fact that you see that it has eschalkos by being mislabish in the kelim, hechrech leimer, that forces you to say, shegamba atzmei lifnei islab shosei bekelim, yeshaychos le'eschalkos. Chalkos. If the light by its nature, within the light itself, wasn't already Shayach to Chalkos, wasn't already connected in some way, had an element of division within it, then it wouldn't be able to be divided by the Kalim. It wouldn't be able to be mislabish in the Kali in a way that separated it, that distinguished it from the other places the Ur is coming. Why? So he says that in Pardes it explains this idea, but it doesn't go so far. In Pardes, it explains this that this, that you see a division in the because it's nislabish in the keli, that doesn't mean that the itself is a different level of but rather just the effect of the is going to be different. The pu'ula, the action of the is going to be different. But based on where it's being nislabish, because it's enclosed within different vessels, so therefore it's going to affect nivraim, it's going to affect creation in different ways. That when you take the same the Pardes is saying the light itself is the same, but when you take that light and put it into chesed, so then the way now it's enclosed within a vessel of chesed, so the way it's going to impact creation is in a manner of chesed. You take that same light and put it into gvura, now it's the slabish and a keli of gvura, and therefore it's going to impact the world in a manner of gvura. But that doesn't seem to be an effect in the itself, it's just in the way it's affecting whatever comes next, because of the keli it's going through. In the Pardes it says that even though the keli changes the nature of the pu'ula, that this of the effect that this has on Nivraim, on creation, but that doesn't mean that the light itself is distinguished. It doesn't mean that the light itself is defined. The light could be a simple light, and yet it'll be expressed in different pu'ules, in different effects, through the different kalim that it's enclosed within. But the light itself could still remain b'pshitus. Based on what the Pardes says, it would seem to be possible to say that there isn't really a big difference between the of Mamali and Seviv. Because even though the of Mamali is nislabish in different kalim, and therefore it's expressed in different ways, but that doesn't mean that the itself it changed at all. Based on that, you could have said that the light itself, before it's actually enclosed in the vessel, maybe is a simple light. It doesn't have any connection to division. It doesn't have within the light itself, this division, this separation into different definitions. Like the mashal that the Pardes brings down of the light of the sun, that the light itself is a simple light. There's one light. How do you know there's only one light? Because light is always an expression of the source of light, and light has to be connected to its source, and therefore the light, regardless of what it's doing later, isn't changing. It's the same sunlight that's coming in all places, but nonetheless, when it's nislabish in a keli, when it's enclosed within a vessel, when it now shines through a stained glass window and it comes through a white glass or a red glass or a green glass, so even though the earth itself didn't change at all, but it will be seen, and therefore it'll affect now in accordance with the color of the vessel, because it was nislabish in the vessel. So you'll see green light, you'll see red light, you'll see white light, but it doesn't mean that the sunlight is any different. Sunlight is just sunlight. It's the same sunlight. It's not shayach to Yischalkus, but when it's nislabish in a keli, when it's enclosed within a vessel, it's going to express itself in different ways. And similarly, we could have said, based on just what the Pardes says, we could have said about Ur HaMamale also, that the Ur is pashut, the Ur is simple, it's one simple light, it's defined only insofar as it's enclosed within different vessels, and the vessel of chesed, the vessel of gvura, and so on. Therefore, it takes on the nature of the keli in terms of the pu'ula that it's now having. But the that's enclosed within it is one and the same. It's a simple is the pashut. However, the Rebbe says that the explanation that we could have given based on just what the Pardes tells us doesn't seem to be enough. Why? Because we know the hasevev. It's true. This idea that we said that that it could be a simple and then come binis labish and kelim, it could be enclosed within vessels, and it'll take on the nature of the vessel. And seemingly that would be enough to explain the nature of Mamale. He says, but we know that can't be the case. Why can't that be the case? Because you see that hasevev doesn't work that way. Why? Because hasevev, we know that gam kishemeir b'seicha kelim, even when it is enclosed within a vessel, eina keli payil by shinei. The keli isn't actually changing it at all. Afilu sheyir rak nira k'fiyei keli. The keli isn't able to change it even so much that it should be expressed, that it should be seen as a green light or a red light or a white light. Ukamuva gam b'maimer anal, as brought down also in that maimer, she'er da'atik gam kameshu nimshach b'zah hu b'bchinas pshitos, that the of atik, even when it comes down into zah, remains pashut. What does that tell you? That tells you that an that is pashut, even when it's nislabish and a keli, will still remain pashut. Which means that the fact that Mamale takes on the nature of the vessel that it's being enclosed within isn't just that it's being a simple but it's being enclosed within a vessel, and therefore it's being expressed in a vessel. Because if it was truly a simple then like hasevev, like the of atik, it wouldn't change because of the vessel. That proves the that the fact that you see that Hamamale does come into the keli and does now express itself in accordance with the nature of that keli. It's divided into of Chesed and of Gvura and of Tiferes and so on. What does that tell you? Since hasevev, even when it comes into the keli, doesn't change, and Mamale does change, at least with regard to its effect, that tells you that this light, even before it came into the keli, it's not just that it's being nislabish in kelim, but that the itself is one that had a shaykhis to his chalkos, is one that had a connection to this idea of definition, to this idea of division, and therefore was able to be divided. And that's why once it's enclosed within a vessel, it actually becomes divided. Must be because this even before it was the slavish and kalim, even before it was enclosed in a vessel, already had a connection, was within the context of the idea of definition, of the idea of division, and therefore once it's enclosed within a particular vessel, it takes on the nature of the vessel and becomes divided. Okay, so what did we say in his base? Basically, the difference between Mamale and hasevev is a simple Mamale takes on the nature of the particular expressions, of the definitions of the recipient of the kelim. You could have said that means, like the Pardes seems to explain it, that it's a simple but just it's nislabish and a keli, it's enclosed within a vessel and therefore is divided according to the definitions of the vessel. However, he said that's not, the Maamar says more than that the fact that the comes b'chalkos, that it's able to be divided, it's able to be defined by the recipient, tells you that even before it was enclosed in a vessel, it was an that was shaykh to his chalkos. It was an that related to the context, to the idea of definition and division, as you see that hasevev, even when it's enclosed within a vessel, doesn't change at all, doesn't take on that particular definition.
So the or of molecule almond does have a fundamental difference. It's not just in the
that's what he's saying. Yeah, exactly.
There's something about it.
The nature of this must be that in the first place it relates to definition, which is why once still it's undefined. Light is light, but once it comes into a vessel, since it was a level of light that in the first place related to the idea of definition, therefore once it came into a vessel, it took on the definition of the vessel. Where do we see? Why would that be the case? What does it mean that hasevev, that the light of sevev is by nature, the light itself isn't able to relate to definition, whereas the Mamale, even though the doesn't have definition, but it's a light that's able to relate to definition, which is why once it's enclosed in a vessel, in a keli, it will take on that definition. So the idea of this is the hakav, the light of the kav. Okay, so a couple of basic definitions before we dive in. You have the way in which the world came about was because there was a tzimtzum arishan, right? You have and seif shelifnei tzimtzum. You have the infinite light of God that existed before anything. But then, in order to create a world, since the world couldn't exist with that degree of revelation, so the Eibishter is mitzamsem. He constricts his light, right? Which means that he removes his light, as it were, from a space and creates a makam pani, creates an empty space. However, even there is still a reshimu. There's still an imprint of what existed there beforehand, of the light that was there beforehand. And then into that empty space, he draws hakav, he draws a line of light, so to speak, that a measured amount of light into that empty space, that then could go through a process of tzimtzumim and alamis and esterim, of constrictions and concealments and going lower and lower, that eventually will be the levels of godliness that we normally talk about, the light that exists within Seder Ishtalshlus, within the order of creation, right, that ultimately leads eventually to the existence of the world as we know it.
So really quick, in the note or in the parentheses is the or mamalahu b'chlal or hakav.
Well, we'll get to that in a second. This is the definitions before we start, right? So the idea in this is as follows: the hakav, the light of the kav, this measured line of light, as it were, that the Eibishter is drawing into the empty space that he created through the tzimtzum in order to bring godliness into the world. The hamimale hu b'chlal hakav. Now, light that fills all the worlds, by definition, is measured, right? It's measured by the level of the recipient, what the recipient is able to handle. Higher and higher worlds and lower worlds, which is the very definition of hakav. It's included in the hakav. The line of light that the Eibishter drew into the empty space includes the hamimale, right? Includes the light that will fill each of those levels, each of those worlds as he creates them. That light, since it comes only after tzimtzum, it's not that into the empty space now is being drawn the original light that was there beforehand. No, that's the whole point of the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum creates an empty space. It affects the hakav. It affects that light, the light of the kav, the measured light that will now be drawn to give life to the worlds. And it's that light that's been affected by the tzimtzum is now what's being drawn down to begin the process of Seder Ishtalshlus, right? Of the order, the process of creation. Which means the fact that it's affected by the tzimtzum means that there was a break here. There was a leap. What was doesn't naturally lead to the next step. There's a quantum leap, right? There's a break.
A tzimtzum,
that
has to happen.
The idea of the tzimtzum was a break, and even the light that's being drawn after the tzimtzum is a light that was also coming after the break, after the leap. The inyanat tzimtzum arishain, because the whole idea of the tzimtzum, the first tzimtzum, hu sha'er sha'yatzchila nisalam legamri, is that the light that was there originally was completely hidden. V'nishar chalal u'makam pani, what was left? A vacuum, an empty space. Umikivan shala'hamshacha shala'achrezeh, he la'achrez almost hefsaker legamri. Whatever revelation is being drawn after the tzimtzum is after that complete concealment. That means that whatever light was there, that stopped, and there's a quantum leap to then begin again something completely lower, not the natural next step, not cause and effect. That means that whatever light is being drawn into the empty space afterwards, the kav that's being drawn into the makam pani, into the chalal and makam pani, into the vacuum and empty space, is b'derech diluk, is in a manner of a light that's drawn after a break. Now, even though it says that even during the tzimtzum there was still an imprint, there was still an effect of what existed beforehand, as is explained in many places, as is brought down also in that very Maamar of the Rashab, that chala lav dafke, that it's lav dafke, a complete vacuum, because there was some imprint of what was there before. Nonetheless, that doesn't mean that after the tzimtzum, there's still the existence of what was there before. It's just an imprint. An imprint means something that's concealed, that's not fully revealed. As is known that the kav is the source of that exists after tzimtzum. The reshimu, the imprint, is the within Ein Sof itself, within the infinite light that existed before the tzimtzum. It's the idea of what will eventually be gvul, what will eventually be mugbal, what will eventually be limitation, which is the source of kelim that will exist later on. So the kelim continue to exist in a certain sense, a reshimu, an imprint of what existed before the tzimtzum. You have some carryover from what was there before the tzimtzum. But that's kelim, which means that's concealed. As far as light goes, as far as revelation goes, as far as what you can see, what you can feel, the original tzimtzum was a complete vacuum, a complete removal, a complete hiddenness. Well, not because
at the level of awe,
yeah,
it feels like it.
In terms of the earth, the reshimu means that there was something that was still there, but in terms of revelation, there was nothing revealed, which means that as far as goes, there was a complete and total removal. Which means that any light that's drawn down afterwards, the reshimu leads to kelim that's in some way remaining from what was there before the tzimtzum, but that's its very nature is concealment. The hakav that's being drawn down into the vacuum, that's something completely fresh. It's completely new, and it's being drawn down now after a break, after in a leap. It's not any element of cause and effect. It's not any element of the natural outcome of the that existed before the tzimtzum. It's a completely new that was affected by the tzimtzum.
But it wasn't created after the tzimtzum.
No.
It has the trace proves that it has some shaykhs to the original zone.
Not only that, could only exist if it's connected to the Maamar, to the source of light, which is what we'll get into in a second.
But it really does feel like there is a halal.
Yes. The had to come through a complete diluk, a complete leap, because there was a moment where there was nothing, as far as that's concerned. The reshimu is still there, but as far as the is concerned, there was a moment where there was absolutely nothing, which means that what's being drawn down now is after a break, is something new, as it were.
Yeah.
Obviously from before, but something new. Ulochem, therefore, he says, think about that. It has to be davuk, because the has to be connected to its source. But the dveikus is one that came through a break. There was a moment where it wasn't there, where it was cut off. So it's still connected, but it's a connection that came after a hafsik, after a break. He says, therefore, gama dveikus to hakav, this that hakav, that the light of the kav is still davuk, is connected to its, and unified, cleaving to its original source, because that's the nature of light. He dveikus shal yidei hefsek, nonetheless, is a dveikus that came through a separation, that came through a break. Ve'ena b'bchinas dveikus mamish. It's not absolute cleaving. It's not absolute oneness, because yes, it's one with its source, but it's one with its source that was only renewed after a break, and therefore there's a disconnect there. So it's connected, but it's still disconnected. How do we see an example? How could we understand this idea of connected and disconnected? It'll bring a mashal. But first, therefore, even though it's and the er's very nature is gilui, is revelation, but the new since it came through a hafsik, it's not completely connected to its source, so therefore it's not as much light, and it's not as much revelation, because it's light that came with a hafsik, that came with it with a separation. How do we understand that idea? That is davuk, it's connected to its source, but nonetheless there was a break, and therefore it's not a full revelation, it's not full light. So we have a physical example of this, which is hair. Why? The life force in hair isn't the same as the life force in the limbs. It's an extremely limited life force. It's alive, it's growing. The only way anything could grow is if it's alive. But yet, it's an extremely limited vitality. So much so that you cut the hair and you don't feel a pain. Why? Because the way in which, yes, the hair in some ways is coming directly from the brain. It's coming directly from the source. Even more so than the limbs that are more separated. But it comes through a break. The break in this case is the break of the skull. Yeah. And the break of the skull, because it's coming through a break, so it's drawn directly from it, and yet it's not fully connected. It's not fully one with the source. So too, the same will be true in the Nimshal above. We talked about the Eirav Mamale. So Haseviv will be like the Chayas and Eivarim. Haseviv, the transcendent light, given Sham Shachasim Im Keiret Vekusim Im Keiret, Hu Shaloi Alidei Hafsek. Since it's drawn, it's different. It's drawn from its source. It's connected to its source, not through a Hafsek. We were talking about the Eirakav as being the source of the Eirav Mamale. He says, 1 second, where did the Eirav Haseviv come from? It also went through a Tzimtzum. He says, no. Even though the Eirav Haseviv also is a new light that was only drawn after the Tzimtzum. Nonetheless, it's known from the various Maamarim, that Tzimtzum affects the Eirav Haseviv also, but not with regard to the light itself. Meaning it doesn't change the light. The Eirav Mamale, like we just said, it changed the light. It stopped completely and now it started something new, which means the light is different. But the Eirav Haseviv, it never changed the light. The effect of the Tzimtzum on the Eirav Haseviv wasn't a change. It just stopped it from being revealed. It stopped it from shining. And therefore its effect afterwards is that it could no longer be revealed b'pnimius. It can't be revealed internally. It can only be in a manner that's outside, that's encompassing, that's surrounding, that's not getting involved in the nature of the recipient of the keli itself. The Ba'er HaMamale Tzimtzum U'B'negei Atzmei. When you talk about the Eirav Mamale, there the Tzimtzum was with regard to the light itself. Shal Yidei HaTzimtzum Nimshach V'Nishava Er Kazeh Shalei Yekadem. Because of the Tzimtzum, there was now drawn down and brought into being a new kav of Er, a new line of light, which is such an Er that didn't exist previously. Mashen Kein Pulas HaTzimtzum B'Eirav Haseviv Ikinal Shiyeh B'B'chinas Makiv Haseviv. But the effect of the Tzimtzum on Eirav Haseviv wasn't in the light itself, but rather just that it should only be encompassing, only be surrounding. But the light itself wasn't a new light that was created afterwards, after the Tzimtzum, which would therefore be not fully davik in its makar, not fully connected to its source because it's coming through a hefsek. The Haseviv is still a revelation of the same the same infinite light that existed before the Tzimtzum, and it's just not able to be revealed in the same fashion, and therefore it can't come b'pnimius. And that's a gilui shalei yidei hafsik. That's a gilui, a revelation that's not through a hafsik. And since the Eirav Haseviv isn't coming through a hafsik, it's still completely davik to its original source. Therefore, the light Eirav Haseviv will be literal and gilui, complete light, complete revelation, because it's completely davik to its makar. It's completely united to its original source. And just like the vitality, the life force that the limbs have, that didn't come through a hefsek hagulgailis, didn't come through the break of the skull, and therefore they're connected to their source in such a way that if you cut chas v'shalom and aver, you cut a limb, you're going to feel it because it's alive, it's fully alive, right? Because it's full it's full gilui. And therefore that light can't have any definition. It can't be defined at all. It can't be divided. The light's going to be the same regardless of where it shines on, regardless of where it comes to. But the Eirav Mamale, which is the Eirav of the Kav, since we said that the way it's drawn down from Eirav Seif, and therefore the way it's now connected to Aaron Seif. It comes through a break, through the break of the Tzimtzum, through a leap. It's no longer, even now when it's being revealed, it's not true revelation, it's not true air, because it's not truly Davik and it's Makar. It's not completely and totally united to its source, like the life force in hair, that it's there, it comes, but it's still not fully alive. Therefore, that's why what we explained in the previous ice, that the in Mamale is that's shaykh to Ischalkos in the first place, it's shaykh to division and definition in the first place. Whereas the in Seviv isn't shaykh to definition in the first place. Not only that the of Mamale is mislabish and the Keli is enclosed within the vessel and changes, but that in the first place it was light that was given to change, that was able to change and able to be divided. Why is that? Because the light is coming through the hefsek of Tzimtzum. Since it comes through the hefsek of Tzimtzum, therefore it's in the first place not fully connected and davak to its makar, to its source, and therefore it's begeder hischalkos. It has the nature of definition. It has the ability, the context of definition, that it's capable of being divided. Which still doesn't mean that the light itself is divided. Light is light. Light is still an expression of its makar, its pshitas. It's simple. But because it relates to definition, therefore when it's later nislabish in a keli, you'll see the will be expressed in accordance with the nature of the keli, because the was capable of definition and division. Whereas the seviv, since it didn't come through the break of tzimtzum, therefore it's connected fully to its makar, to its source. Therefore, even when it comes down here, it's not begeder eschalkos. It doesn't relate to division and definition altogether, and therefore even when it's nislabish and akeli, it won't change the at all.
According to this, though, shouldn't the light, the that's mamalakal almond, be for lasid lafu? Because that's the higher light. It's or ein sof that's able to be.
Give it a moment. We'll come on. We'll come to that in a second. Okay. So what did we explain in Eis Gimel? We explained the reason for what we explained in Eis Beis. In Hayisheves, we said that the Eira Seviv is Pashat completely, right? Whereas Eira Mamali is beged, the itself is already begeder Chalkus even before it's Slavish and a Keli, and is divided by the definition of the Keli. Why is that? Because the Mamali is Kav, which was affected by the Tzimtzum, and therefore it's coming through a break, and therefore it's not completely davuk to its makar. Therefore it's begeder Chalkus. It's able to be mischalik because it came through a dilug and a hefsek. Whereas the Seviv is never affected by the tzimtzum in the first place. It's completely davik to its makar, and therefore it's completely bipshitos. And even when it's the slavish and akeli, the is going to remain bipshitos. Now that'll explain what we said in Neis Aleph, that in order to go from the revelation of Gan Eden to the revelation of Lasid Lavai, you have to run away, meaning it's again a quantum leap, right? It's a whole different level. It's not just cause and effect. Kamoshin is barlil b'tchilas hamayim r'diya kaloshin barach al hari b'samim. Barach dafka, like we said at the beginning, that you have to run away to the hari b'samim. Why? To kiv on shachiluk shebein eira mamale hagilid Gan Eden le'ira sevev hagilid Lasid Lavai u'loirak. Because what did we explain? We explained that the difference between Mamali and Seviv isn't just, as it were, quantitatively, that this could be enclosed within the vessel and therefore changes. Seviv, by definition, isn't enclosed within the vessel and therefore it doesn't change. It's just shining on it from above and it doesn't matter to it where it's coming, right? But now that would seem to be just the way in which it's being expressed. But we explained in the Maamar that in this last ice that they're also inherently different. Yeah. Their nature is different. The way in which they're drawn from their original source is different. The Mamali came through the leap, came through the break of the Tzimtzum, as opposed to Seviv, which didn't. Moving, if that's the case, it's understood. That means that the difference between Eira Seviv and Eira Mamale isn't just in the nature of the way it's being the slavish and the keli, or some effect that it's having on the level that it's giving life to, but rather they're different levels of in the first place, an incomparable level. This is of the Lifnei Tzimtzum, this is that Tzimtzum affected. If that's the case, we understand that in order to go up from the Gili of Gan Eden, from the revelation of Eira Mamale, to the Gili of Lasid Lavi, to the Eira Seviv, it's not enough. It's to just go up a level, because it's not a comparable level at all. It's a different mohus altogether. It's a different essence altogether. The only way you could get there is through a leap. B'derech bricha, it's through a jump. Just like drawing down the light of the Kav, which is the source of Eira Mamale, from the Eira Seif Shelifnei Tzimtzum, which is the source of Eira Seviv. It took a leap, it took a complete break. If that's the case, then to go back up also takes a leap. To get from Eira Mamale, Eira Kav, to Eira Seviv, which is the revelation of Eira Seif Lifnei Tzimtzum, the way it is originally, without going through that break, you're going to have to go through a break. You're going to have to go through a leap. You're going to have to run away. It's not just an orderly next step.
So Yemos HaMashiach, Lasid Lavo, allows for that, because that's in the future, and we don't have to know how that's going to happen. There can be a halal, and we can jump back up to the level of Sova.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of Mashiach is a revelation of Eira Seviv, essentially. Now, as we see here. Okay, but we'll get to how you do this. Here, he first says, well, 1 second, there's one element that we said in Nais Aleph that we still didn't explain. If you remember, we said, even though Eir HaSeviv is completely and totally higher than Eira Mamale, so much so that it needs a bricha, it needs to run away to it, nonetheless, you can't get there without going through Mamale first. Right? You can't get to a Gili of Eira Seviv, a Gili of Lasid Lavi, without first the Gili of Hayisheves Beganim, the Gili of Gan Eden, which is the Gili of Eira Mamale. Why? If it's a completely different level, so why does it require going through first the first one? If they have nothing to do with each other, you should be able to go straight there. Right? It should be two different paths completely.
I mean, if it's sequential,
it's sequential, then it makes sense that you need to do A before B.
But we just said that they're not.
But if they're not sequential, let's say A isn't leading to B, so then why do you have to go through A to get to B? Why can't you just go to B directly?
Yeah.
So he says, nonetheless, even though the revelation of Gan Eden is completely incomparable to the revelation of Lasid, and therefore seemingly you shouldn't have to go through it first. Nonetheless, nonetheless, you first need the revelation of Gan Eden, and that's the introduction, and dafka only through that can you reach the Gilid Lasid. Why would that be? So he says the reason, and this is as follows. Before it's Yud Gimel, the beginning of Yud Gimel Mitzrachim, it says Hashem, Hashem, right? Hashem's named twice. But the trop divides them, right? Yeah. Hashem, and then Hashem, then a second thing. Yodua, what does that mean that there's a division between those two levels of Havaya? So Yodua, the Havaya, Aleph Havaya D'Leila. The first time it says Hashem's name, that's higher Havaya, Havaya D'Leila. Shem Havaya Shebe'er and Seif Shelifnei Tzimtzum, the way Hashem's name is expressed in Eir and Seif before Tzimtzum. V'Havaya Bezu Havaya D'Lasata, the second time Havaya is Havaya the way it is down here. Shem Havaya Shebe'er Akav, Shem Havaya the way it is within Eir Akav, which we said is the source of Eira Mamale. Pasik time of begavai or psik time of begavai, there's a separation between them. Why does there have to be a separation between Eir and Seif Shelifnei Tzimtzum Havaya D'Leila and the Eir Akav Havaya D'Lasata? That's the Hefsikat Tzimtzum Shebein Eir and Seif Eir Akav. That's the separation of the Tzimtzum that comes between Eir and Seif and Eir Akav. Before we get into what that means, that's also what we have in the first pasuk of Krishma. We say Havaya Alekeinu, Havaya Echad. So it's Havaya, then Alekeinu, then Havaya. In other words, you have again 2 times Havaya, Havaya de Leila and Havaya de Lasata, higher Havaya and lower Havaya, Ein Seif Shalifnei Atzimtzum and Erakav. But in between that, you have Elikenu. Why? The Elikenu at Tzimtzum, because Elikenu is the Tzimtzum shebein Havaya de Leila Ein Seif Shalifnei Atzimtzum v'Havaya de Lasata Erakav. Right? Elikenu is the Tzimtzum that comes between the higher Havaya, Ein Seif, the way it is before Tzimtzum, and the lower Havaya, the of the Kav. So he explains in the Maamar, what does this mean? What is Elikenu that divides between the 2 Shemus Havaya? The Mashkos of Elikenu bein Beis HaShemus Havaya. The reason why it says Elikenu between them, the Elikenu Mashen Ken Elikim Im Yesei Meiral Midas Adin Yesh Be'ataya L'Chesed L'Rachamim. Elikim generally is judgment, is Gvura, right? Havaya is Chesed, and Elikim is Gvura. But Elikenu, he says, it's still the root is Elikim, so it's still Midas Adin, but nonetheless, there's already a hataya, there's a slant, a lean towards Chesed and Rachamim. Seemingly, Elikenu, the fact that it could be our God is already not so scary, right? It's ours. It relates to Chesed and Rachamim. Ki al yidei Elikenu dafka, and Elikenu specifically, meaning Gvura din, but with Ataya to Chesed Rachmim, hu achibor sheyumshach hagilui v'ashefa mehavayid le'ila lavayid l'sata. That's the connector that allows you to draw down the revelation, the energy, the flow from havayid le'ila, from the higher Havaya to havayid l'sata, to the lower Havaya. Rabbi, you could say the explanation in the Israel Derech Hayidua Binyan Kelim, that it's like we know about the whole idea of Kelim altogether. If the Erakav had remained without a tzimtzum, meaning this light that's coming from before the tzimtzum, theoretically, if that light had just remained where it was, it says you couldn't have Kelim, because it was too powerful. It would have broken all the kelim.
And it did.
Later again, you have Shver Sakelim. Mikol Makim, La'achri Shedesavu HaKelim, Hem Yechelim L'Kabel Esagili De'Rakav. Nonetheless, how does Simsum work then? What's the point? You're just bringing back what was there before. The answer is that once there was a vacuum, and within that begins the idea of a keli, and then you draw into the keli the even though it's the akav that if that was still there, you couldn't have a keli, but now that the keli is already there, it can handle the revelation of akav. Why? Kikivan shesavusam haisa ideit simsum b'derech siluk davken lochein esavu b'efen gazet the leirak sheinem is batlem mahagili derakav eli yiseder mizu shegili derakav while yidei akelim davken. Since the whole way in which the Kalim were brought into being was through a tzimtzum, was with a tzimtzum first, and then into that was drawn the So therefore, when the now is revealed within them, it doesn't break them anymore. On the contrary, the only way you could have a revelation of light is through a Keli. Which means, not only is the Keli not being this battle through the it's what actually allows the to express itself. כי בצמצום שבדרך סילוק דווקא מסגלה עצם של המיילה מהגדר דגילי ארס והלם כלם. ולכן על ידי הצמצום בדרך סילוק נעשה החיבר דכלם וארס. Why is this allowed through tzimtzum? Because when you have a tzimtzum, and a complete tzimtzum, a tzimtzum that's not just constricting the light that's there, but completely removing it first, that's how you're able to reveal the essence. And the essence is beyond the entire definition of revelation or concealment of Eris or Kalim. And therefore, once you have the tzimtzum, which is a revelation of the essence, then you're able to reveal something which is no longer the definition of Eris and Kalim. And therefore, after that tzimtzum, you're able to have a unification of Eris and Kalim, which by nature are opposites. And the same is true for the Erakav. Since the way it's drawn from Erin Seif is first through a tzimtzum, that's in a manner of complete removal. And the late actually is battle. Beforehand, you need a tzimtzum, you need a break in order for there to be to bring it to being there rakav, because it's not a logical next step. It's completely bein arich. It's not comparable. But once it's created in a way that it could now handle the revelation of what wouldn't have allowed its existence in the first place. Which means that how are you going to ever bring about revelation of Eres through Kalim? How are you going to bring about the Gilui of Ein Seif Shelifnei Tzimtzum specifically through the Erakav? So that explains why we said that you need first the Gilui of Gan Eden before you could get to the Gilui of Lasad Lavai, even though it requires a bricha, it requires running away because it continues to be Bein Arich, because since it was created through a Tzimtzum B'derech Siluk, so therefore the nature of its creation is such that it allows now for the revelation of what wasn't able to be revealed previously. Not only that, the only way Erin Seif Shelifnei Tzimtzum could ever be revealed is dafka after you have the Gili of Eram Amali, which isn't comparable to the Erin Seif Shelifnei Tzimtzum, but after you have it, that allows for the Gili of Erin Seif Shelifnei Tzimtzum.
Because if there's nothing on the other side of Tzimtzum,
and now they're in a way that there's a relationship between them, even though it's still a break between them. Even though it still requires a bricha to get from one to the other, but you have to go through one in order to get to the other. You have to go through A to get to B.
You want to keep that going. You don't have to stop.
He continues in the Maamar. According to what he explains elsewhere. So he continues in the Maamar that elsewhere it's explained that what's Elekeinu? Elekeinu is Eleka Shalanu, our God. In other words, that's Shem Havaya, the way it's expressed in every Yid. As it says in the pasuk Chelek Havaya Amai, that the portion of Havaya is his people. In other words, that every Yid is an expression of Elekeinu, of Eleka Shalanu, Havaya, the way it comes down into a person. So based on that, then it's even more understood why Elokeinu is the connector between Havaya D'Leila and Havaya D'Lasata. Why? Dal Yidei Havaya D'Yisrael. Through the Aved of a Yid, and the Aved of the Yid in the Havaya that's contained in his Neshama, that's what allows for the combination, for the connection between the two levels, of Havaya, between Havaya below and Havaya above, that through Elekeinu, which now we're understanding not just as Elekeinu, the Tzimtzum, but Derech Siluk, but also Elekeinu, the way Havaya is expressed in Ayid, that's what allows Havaya D'Lasata to shine, within Havaya D'Lasata, to shine a revelation of Havaya D'Leila. Right? So he's explaining that Elekeinu is godliness, Havashem Havaya, the way it's expressed in the Neshama of a Yid, and it's the godliness, the way it's expressed in the Neshama of a Yid. That's the connector, the connector between Havaya D'Leila and Havaya D'Lasata that allows Havaya D'Leila to shine and to be expressed in Havaya D'Lasata. What does it mean, Shem Havaya in a Yid, in a Neshama? So he explains over there in the Maamar that there's 4 letters of Shem Havaya, and these are expressed by 4 different levels of a Yid's Neshama. The Inyan HaYud Shem Havaya Shebenefesh Hu Anachas Atzmusei. What is the Yud of Shem Havaya in the person's soul? That's the person's Anachas Atzmusei. He's putting himself aside completely. Leik Tzichavek Legamri Tzelokus Ve'ine Mischashev Im Sichle. The Yud of the Neshama is the element that puts himself completely aside, dedicates himself completely to Elokus, and it doesn't take into consideration altogether his seichel, his own intellect. What does that mean, not to take into consideration your own intellect? The lois ubavad the gam kseichel shaloi. One level of not taking into consideration your intellect is that when your intellect leads you to a different conclusion, you don't care about that. You don't concern yourself. You don't take it into account. Which includes not only the fact that you're willing to go against your own intellect, But you're willing to go against the fact that everybody's going to say on you that you're a meshuganer, right? That you're behaving in a way that's hapachas seichel. But you're not going to take that into account. You're completely dedicated to Elokus. But he says, but putting your intellect aside goes even further than that. Not only that you're willing to go against your intellect and against people saying that you're going to be, that you're hapachas seichel, ela yiseda mizu, even more than that. Putting your intellect aside and not taking it into account means not just that you're willing to go against it, but that even you're willing to go even when it's for it, you're not doing it because of that. You're not limited by the fact that your seichel tells you that godliness is good, but rather your connection to Elokus is beyond what your seichel tells you. As is explained elsewhere, seichel itself will tell you that there are certain things above seichel. So therefore, seichel itself also, to some extent, will tell you that Elokus is good. But rather, you're still not going to limit your connection to Elokus to this that Seichel is willing to accept. Rather, you put yourself aside, you give yourself up to godliness without any calculations, even the calculation that leads you to want to connect to Elokus, because that's also going to limit you. So that's the Yud. The Yud of Shem Havaya in our nefesh is the fact that we're willing to put ourselves completely aside and give our entire essence to the Elokus, even beyond Seichel, which means to go against Seichel, or even when Seichel tells you to do it, not to be limited by what Seichel is telling you to do.
But Shem Havaya is also Seder Hishtalshalis. It has the 4 levels.
But we're looking at these levels within the neshama. Elekenu, the way Shem Havaya is expressed in a yid. Chelek Havaya Amay, the way the Havaya is expressed in the yid. So the yud will be the willingness to put yourself completely aside. What's the hey, the first hey within your neshama? V'inyan hey rishayna, the first hey, who is beinanos ich shekol hagiluyim sheba'ilameis, afilu hagilid sev kol hamen makol sheken hagilid malek kol hamen, hu rak ha'ara belvad shenim shcha yidei kama v'kama tzimtzumim. There's the first hay of Shem Havaya within the neshama is the meditation, the hizbeinunos, focusing on the fact that everything that exists within the worlds, all of the revelations, the revelation of Seviv and definitely the revelation of Mamale, that's only a reflection that came through many tzimtzumim, because they all come through tzimtzumim, meaning to recognize that the highest godliness that I could perceive, the highest degree that I could understand about Elokus, that's still nothing to the Eibishter. That's still only a reflection. That's still something that came through many concealments, through many constrictions. What happens because of this hay? The Yud causes him to put himself aside completely. The hay is the Hizbeinunos in the fact that even the highest levels of godliness that I understand are only a ha'ara, are only a reflection. That causes him to be very tsar. That's the constriction. That's uncomfortable. As verdem zeir eng, it becomes very constricting for him. Even more so when he actually considers and thinks about his own personal standing, his own personal situation. How he's distant from godliness. Why does he find himself in this situation that he's distant from godliness? You know why that happens? Because the godliness that exists, that is revealed in the world, is only a limited reflection in the first place. Therefore, it's possible for me to end up distant from Elokus. Because it's only a limited reflection, and the lower it comes, the more it's mitzamsim, the more it's limited, the more it's constricted. That's what allows me to end up in the situation that I am, distant from godliness, because the godliness that exists within the world is only constricted, and that allows me to become distant from it. And that causes him, when he reflects on this, it causes him to become even more uncomfortable. It becomes so constricted, so pressured, that he has no place at all.
Really quick though, not necessarily, because Perek Lamed Aleph of Tanya says a similar kind of inyan. But he says that if you break through and you understand truly how nothing is, it's all mavada before the Eibishter, then you're going to be besimcha. It's going to be the opposite.
It's not saying that there won't be simcha, but it's bittul. Complete and total nullification. He's removing, there's no room for him. There's no room for his metzias. V'yesh loymar, he says, and you could say that this is actually a process. The yud leads to the hey. Shebichdei shiyu naches le'etzol zich ablegen be'emes. In order for it to truly settle, to truly be clear and upleg, absolute awareness, that Havana Vasagazu, this comprehension, this understanding, the only way you'll reach that is if you first have the Yud. If you first have that Hanachas Atzmusay, the complete dedication of your very essence to Hashem, that's the only way you'll truly comprehend honestly, internally, and it'll be obvious to you that the godliness that exists within the world is only a limited one, that therefore it causes you to be distant. Why? Because since Seichel is already a Metziah, Seichel is already an entity, an existence. Seichel exists. And since Seichel exists, Seichel can't truly comprehend, especially in such a way that it'll cause a constriction within oneself, that all of existence is distant from godliness. Because the Seichel is already in existence. So the fact that you understand it means that you can't understand it. So therefore, the only way you could truly understand this idea is first you have to have that complete dedication of your very essence beyond intellect, which is the inyan yud, the idea of the yud, which is nekuda bavad, which is just a point. It's not fully expressed. It's not expressed within you. It's just a complete and total self-nullification. That once you have that complete anachas atzmusay, and that's not limited by seichel, that could affect that your seichel should also understand it. Your seichel will correspond to that essential point, and that's called nekuda behechala, the point in its chamber. In other words, it's that the nekuda, the bittul, is now being expressed in the yesh as well, in the mitzias as well. So that's the Yud and the Hey. Yud and the Hey is, Yud is putting yourself completely away. The Hey, the first Hey is the Hizbeinenus, that the godliness that's found in the world is just a reflection. The Vav the Shem Havaya the Vav of the Shem Havaya within our soul, that's learning Torah. The La'achri is Beinenus Aveda Deir Shena Sheklolos Aglim Shbeilim Esimiraka Aram Tzemtzemetz. After you've meditated on the fact that the Aved, which is the first, the Aveda, the first day, that all the revelations that exist in the world are only a limited reflection, that causes you to be very constricted, as we said before. It says they called out to the Eibishter when it was constricted. He cries out and davens the Eibishter that what do we want? We want that there should be a revelation of the essence, the atzmos of infinite light of the Eibishter beyond Simsum. And when a person recognizes that and wants that, what's the only way you could quench that thirst? Through learning Torah. The bittul of Hanachas Atzmusay and the Hizbeinenus that everything that exists is only a reflection of the Eibishter makes you want, I want to reveal the essence to the Eibishter. How am I going to reveal the essence to the Eibishter? By learning Torah, because that's the only way, Tfisa, Mislabesh, that's the only way that the essence of the Eibishter is reflected in the world. And that's the Vav of Shem Havaya within our soul.
Even Limud Torah is Mislabesh in the Seichel. I mean, you need the mind to learn Torah. So
yeah, but what you're learning is the Eibishter's Torah. If it comes after the bittul of Hanachas Atzmusay and so on. Even though Eiraisa comes from Chachma, the Meloshim ze atzmai, Eiraisa mechachma nafkes tafka, moven shesherish atero rasna elyon shalamayla machachma. The fact itself that it says that Torah comes out from Chachma, that means that it's not Chachma. And that tells you that the source of the Torah is actually not Chachma, it's even higher, it's the Ratzon Elyon, it's the divine will that's higher than Chachma. Then it comes down into intellectual ideas, into Chachma. And where is it nafkis? Where is it go out? Where does it come to revelation? In Chachma. But its source is from higher than Chachma. So that's the Vav of Shem Havai in our soul. And what's the latter hey in Shem Havai in the soul? Who ma'isa mitzvahs is the actions of mitzvahs. Shezeh balachri aveda the vav that comes after the aveda of the vav of the Torah. Ki b'chtei lekayim hamitzvahs kedabayit tzarich leidas ha'ma'isa sheyaseh. First you have to know what to do, then you're able to fulfill the mitzvahs. So the vav leads to the last hey. So basically what he said in this ice is that we said Havaya lekeinu Havaya, that to get from Havaya the leila to Havaya the lesata, from Erin Seif Shalifnei Atzimsum to Eira Kavt, from Eira Seif to Eira Mamale, you need to come through Elekeinu. He said another meaning in Elekeinu is Elekeinu Havaya, the way it's expressed in Ayid. What is Havaya the way expressed in Ayid? He explained the Yud is Anachas Atzmusay, the Hey, the first Hey is the Isbeinos, that everything's just a Ara, and the discomfort that creates, the bittul that creates. The vav is limud Torah, and the hey, the second day is ma'isa mitzvahs. Even though now the action of mitzvahs we're saying is the last hey, which only comes after learning Torah, which is the vav, which seems to imply that it's lower. That itself makes you understand that there's also an advantage in mitzvahs over Torah. As the Rebbe Rashab explains at length in the Maamar, even though we said Torah, its source is from Ratzon Elyon, which is higher than Chachma, Ratzon, the Torah and Slavish Chachma. Nonetheless, we're talking about a level of Ratzon that then is expressed within intellect, within Chachma. The Mizem Muchach Sheratzon Zegam Lefnei Slav Shilse B'Chachma Hu Ratzon Shemurka Ve'Zedavar. The fact that it could then be enclosed within wisdom, within intellect, shows you that that level of Ratzon is a Ratzon that even before it was enclosed was a Ratzon that's defined in some way, that's made up of something. It's not a Ratzon Pashut, it's not a simple will, as will be expressed in the fact that it's able to be expressed in intellect. As opposed to the will that's expressed in the mitzvahs is a will that's not defined, that's not mixed with anything at all. Because the will within mitzvahs is for action. Action Begashmius isn't comparable at all. You can't say that the will is expressed in the action, because action isn't on the level of being anything compared to Ratzon, even to Chachma, for how much more so to Ratzon. When Ratzon is expressed in Chachma, you could say that's a Ratzon that's expressed within the Chachma, and therefore it shows that it's a Ratzon that relates to Chachma. Ratzon expressed in Maisa doesn't rate at all. Which means that when the will is for an action, it's not made up of anything. It's not clothed within anything, because Maisa doesn't rate, and therefore it's just the pure Ratzon. And therefore through the actions of mitzvahs, that adds understanding and comprehension to Torah, just like we're saying through the Gilui of Gan Eden. That enables us to reach the Gilui of Lasid Lavai, like it says in the pasuk Tuv Tam Vadas Lamdeni, keep mitzvah Monti. Good knowledge and wisdom, and I learned. You taught me because I believed in your mitzvahs. What does that mean? Through the kiyama mitzvahs, through the mitzvahs. And especially when the fulfillment of mitzvahs isn't because of the reason, isn't because of the intent, isn't because of our understanding of the mitzvahs, but rather because of a hamanti with emunah pshuta, that brings us to a higher level in Torah itself, because the mitzvah has within it a purer level of ratzon than is expressed within Torah.
Wait, can you explain just the last bit of how Adarabba Maisa does have a shaykh to all of it? Like it's...
He's saying that Maisa Mitzvahs is actually in a way higher than Limud Torah. Why? When Ratzon is expressed in Chachma and intellect, that means it's a level of Ratzon that related to intellect. When Ratzon is expressed in...
It's the next level.
Because Ratzon relates, a level of Ratzon could relate to Chachma, because they're comparable to one another, which means it's a lower level of Ratzon that's able to be expressed in intellect. Maisa and Ratzon don't relate to one another whatsoever. So a Ratzon for a Maisa isn't that the Ratzon is made up of Ratzon that relates to Maisa, because Ratzon can't relate to Maisa. So that's pure Ratzon. Which means there's an element of Maisa mitzvahs that's higher than Limud HaTorah.
It's the same halal between Ratzon and Chochma and Maisa as he made earlier. As the
in a sense. The one that's coming through a break is a necessary prerequisite to the one that's not coming through a break. Because there's an element of it that's higher.
For sure.
Hayisheves beganim. So now we'll come back to the original pasuk. That's the meaning of Hayisheves beganim, who sits in the gardens. Baruch deidi al hari besamim. My beloved ran away to the mountains of besamim. Tina yadua, because we know shagili shebegan eden hu beikar zeh shemizgal al haneshama sapnimis velukus shalatera shalam delamata. Just like we said through the Maisa mitzvahs, you come to Limud HaTorah. So too, what is the gili of Gan Eden? The gili of Gan Eden is that the neshamis it's being revealed to the neshamis, the inner dimension, the elukus, the godliness of the Torah that they learned down here. But so you're seeing again how mitzvahs are really higher than Torah in a certain way, because the Torah that we learn down here, when we get to Gan Eden, then we realize the godliness of it. We're taught the godliness of it. The mitzvahs that we do down here, that even when we get to Gan Eden, we don't really see the pnimius of it, because the revelation of Eir and Seif that comes as a result is primarily but lasid love. The schar mitzvahs ma'al maleka, as it says in the Gemara, that the reward of mitzvahs isn't in this world. It's only lasid love. Because when Mashiach comes, there'll be the revelation of the Eras Seviv, and not only will there be a revelation of Eras Seviv, there'll be a revelation of Atzmos, of the essence of Hashem Himself. That's why the revelations we call the mountains of spices, right? The spice mountains. What is Hari Bisamim? So it comes to the word Hari Bishamayim, mountains in the heavens. What does that mean? Hainu Harim Sheba Shamayim, the mountains within the heavens. Shamayim Makif and Kol Almin. The heavens is a reference to Makif, to that which surrounds the worlds. Vaharim Sheba Shamayim, the mountain within Shamayim itself. Shagam Bishamayim Himarim Baltim, what sticks out, what's a mountain even in the heavens. When Yimgilia Atzmas Shalamai Legam Seviv. So Shamayim is a reference to Eras Seviv, to the encompassing lights. Harim Shabash Shamayim is the mountains within the heavens, is a reference to Gili Atzmas, to revelation of the essence of Hashem. It says he ran away to the Hari B'Samim. Why? Because whatever revelation we could achieve in Memali, which is what we get in Gan Eden, compared to the Gili of Seviv of Shamayim, and how much more so compared to the Gili of Atzmas, the mountains within Shamayim, is completely incomparable. The Legabe Atzmas Kama Seviv V'Einarech, because the essence of the Eibishter, even Seviv, is incomparable. Like it says, Rabbi Sasisa, Nifleisecha Machshavisecha Eleinu Einarech Lecha. He'll break down another pasuk to show this interplay of Memale, Seviv, and Atzmus. It says in the pasuk, Rabbi Sasisa, many you did, Nifleisecha Machshavisecha Eleinu, right? Your wonders, your thoughts, Eleinu to us, Ein Arich Elecha, there's no comparison to you. What does that mean? So he says, Rabbi Sasisa, Rabbi says, Klolos Kolagiluim Seviv Mali. Rabbi, the many, is a reference to all revelations, Seviv Mali, everything. Shenikraim Rabbis, Al Derech Mashkas Bezeir, my Rabbis, Gedoles Eloin V'Ravrivin. They're called rabbis, the many, because what's rabbis? Great. Eloin V'Ravrivin, uplifted, many, right? That goes on everything. So rabbis, the many, which is all the revelations, Sevim, Amali, everything. On rabbis, it says, Asisa, you made them. What does that mean? The Chol HaGiluyim, all levels of revelation, even though they're very great, even though they're exalted, and many, they're only like an action to the Eibishter. And then he continues in the pasuk, your wonders and your thoughts. The Seviv, your wonders, those are the revelations of Seviv, which is referred to as a wonder that's completely above and beyond the Shtalshlus. Machshavei Secha are the revelations within Memali. Va'emer, and he says, Shekol Hagili Diniflei Secha, Machshavei Secha, all of the revelations of Niflei Secha, which is the revelations of Seviv, and Machshavei Secha, the revelations of Memali, Hu Rakeleinu, that's only for us. That's only matters, that's only great, that's only incredible to us. As the pasuk concludes, but to the Eibishter, they're nothing. They're incomparable, they're meaningless. As the pasuk concludes, or continues, and what's the end of the pasuk? Agida v'atzabeira otzmu misaper. So hamshachas, I'm drawing down these lights. That to the Eibishter is nothing. Is agida v'adabeira. I will speak. I will talk. Hagada v'diburu inyan hamshacha. That's that speaking and talking. That's drawing down. Me'atzma seirein seif. The way we bring it down from the infinite essence of the Eibishter himself. Yidei ribui tzimtzumim otzma misaper is through many tzimtzumim. Too many to talk about. Getting back to the point, that was a little tangent to show how and everything, even the highest Giluyim, are like nothing to the Eibishter, even the Gilui of Seviv, as we see in that pasuk, Rabbi Sasisa. But back to the point of Barach Deidi Al Harei B'Samim, the Kivan Shas Seviv Sin Seviv Mikol Shegen Atzmos, and even how much more so Atzmos. Heim L'mayla Megilui are completely above revelation. Lachein Agili Shlem Lasad Lava Hu Ayidei Kedimas Eira Mamali Shemeir Began Eden. Therefore, in order to reach the Harei B'Samim, even though it still takes a Barach, it still takes running away. First, you need Hayisheves Beganim. First, you need a revelation of the Eira Mamali, which shines in Gan Eden. Because the very nature of Eira Mamali is revelation. And once you have that revelation, once you have Hayisheves Beganim, Lachein Al Yadei Dafke, therefore specifically through it after that revelation, Gama Inyanim Shemitzad Atzma Mebegeder Helam, even Eira Seviv, and how much more so Atzmos, which by nature are concealed, are beyond revelation. They're not able to be drawn in a revelation B'Panimios. Nonetheless, you then, through Hayisheves Beganim, you're able to reach Barach Deidi Al Harei B'Samim, they're Nimshachim Begilui, even those things that are naturally beyond revelation are then drawn into revelation. And that's again an explanation of why you have to go through first Gan Eden, before Giluyim of Gan Eden, before you could get to the Giluyim of Lasid Lavei, because first you need the Gilui of Eira Mamali, because its nature, it's Gilui, and therefore it allows for the Barach Deidi Al Harei B'Samim, it allows for the Eira Seviv and Atzmos to also be drawn down Begilui.
Meaning it's the mashal is running away to the mountain. Meaning
it still takes a leap.
It takes a leap.
Because it's still not a natural next step, but nonetheless, even though it takes a leap, you could only get that leap after you have a Hayisheves Beganim, because that's what introduces the concept of Gilui, and therefore that's what allows the Eira Seviv and Eira Atzmos and Gilui Atzmos to also be drawn Begilui.
The Gilui makes a person wonder what's beyond the Gilui, what's hiding in the...
I don't think it's just about that. You could only achieve that Gilui once you've had this Gilui. Okay. It allows the light itself to come in a manner of Gilui. Because we're saying that the Eira Seviv and definitely Atzmos by nature are Begeder Helam, and therefore they need the Gilui of Gan Eden, so to speak, in order for them to be Nizgala. You could add in this, there's the famous explanation, the one that the Friedrich Rebbe focuses on in Hayisheves Beganim within Basi Legani, is Chaveirim Makshivim L'Keilecha, the friends are listening to your voice. It says Hayisheves Beganim Chaveirim Makshivim L'Keilecha. That's the part of the pasuk we skipped, right? That friends are listening to your voice. Chaveirim Malachei Sharis. So one of the interpretations of that is that Chaveirim goes on the Malachim. Ve'im Makshivim L'Keilecha L'Keilat Teiravat Tefillah Yisrael, and they're listening to your voice. That's the voice of Torah and davening of Yidden. Why is that? Deliyah Shekel V'Dibra Adam gashmi, since the person's voice, the person's speech is physical. Lachem michdei shiyalu ateiru v'atfilah shel ha'adam. While yidei sha'malachim ezachim meisam, for a person's Torah and tefillah to go up to the heavens requires the malachim to listen to it. It requires the malachim to purify it, as it says the gafin lahainu menashik lain, that they hug them and they kiss them, and that purifies, that shines them and allows them to be elevated. And because of that interpretation, listening to your voice, which is that the malachim elevate the letters of Torah and davening of a yid, then there's another interpretation of makshim l'keilecha. Not that the malachim are listening to our voice in order to elevate it, that we need them, but actually that they are listening to our voice. In other words, they now receive from the letters of Torah and Tefillah of a Yid, because the Torah and Tefillah of a Yid, even though it needs the malachim to be elevated, but also it's way higher, it's infinitely higher than the malachim. And just like that process with makshiv chaverim, makshivim l'keilecha, that both we need them to elevate them, but they are also then received from them, and they are elevated much higher. So too with the Giluyim of Lasid Lavai, with the Hare Bisamim, the Agam Shem Nalemein Arich Legabe Gilim, the Gan Eden, even though they're infinitely higher than the revelations of Gan Eden. Mikol Makim, nonetheless, you first need Hayisheves Beganim, Mikivan Shagiluyim, the Lasid Warishanim, Shachaydi Asiyas Amitzis B'Dvarim Gashmim, Shabailam Azeh Gashmi V'Achumri. Since, as we said before, the revelation that comes Lasid Lavai when Mashiach comes. Where did that come from? That was from the Maisa Mitzvahs, the Giluyim in Gan Eden is from the Torah that we learn, and the Giluyim of Lasid Lava is Char Mitzvahs by Amaleka, is from the Maisa Mitzvahs, the physical actions of mitzvahs in the physical material world. But that means that they first need to be purified and refined. Therefore, they have to first be purified. How is that done? So that's why you need first Hayisheves Beganim. Another reason, Al Yedei Shailim LeGan Eden, first they're elevated to Gan Eden. The Gan Eden, whom is Zuchach Betachlis, because Gan Eden is inherently absolutely pure. As we know, that's why Adam Rishon was kicked out of Gan Eden, because once he sinned, Gan Eden can't handle sin, it's ultimate purity. So therefore Gan Eden purifies the mitzvahs of the Yidden that are done in the physical world. Elosha Achshav. But nowadays, even now, the mitzvah is refined through the Giluyim of Gan Eden. But nowadays, it's refined through the Gilui of Gan Eden, but the Etzema mitzvah still doesn't shine completely. Only a reflection of it. And that's why now we have only the Giluyim of Eira Mamale. But once you have the Eira Mamale, once you have Hayisheves Beganim, and the whole inyan of Eira Mamale, like we said before, is revelation, so therefore that's able to pile even in those things which naturally aren't able to be revealed, that they should also be revealed, and therefore after Hayisheves Beganim, after the Giluyim of Gan Eden, that brings about that when that Lasid Lavi, there'll be the revelation of the essence of the mitzvah as well, which is the Gilui HaSeviv, the revelation of the HaSeviv contained within the mitzvah, Ulamayla Yeser, and even higher, Hare Besamim, the mountains of Besamim, Hare Mishamayim, which as we said before is Gilui Pshitas Atzmas, it'll be a revelation of the essence of Atzmos. So Bekitzer, these last few Aysias explain the process by which Hayisheves Beganim is a necessary prerequisite to Barach Deidi Al Hari Besamim, that even though Barach Deidi Al Hari Besamim means that the Gili of Eram HaSeviv is completely and totally higher, and how much more so the Gili of Pshitas Atzmos is completely and totally higher, so much so that it needs a bricha, then Hayisheves Beganim, then the Gili of Eram Mamale, then the Gili in Gan Eden. Nonetheless, only through the Gili in Gan Eden, through the Gili of Eira Mamale, are you then able to reveal, to purify the mitzvah, and therefore be Megala the Etzema mitzvah, which is the Eira Seviv, that brings eventually to the Giluyim of Lasid Lavei, to the Gili of Pshitus Atzmos.
Oh, yeah.